In Britain's conversation, Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Cross Question, Tuesday's edition. You can phone us on 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. Watch us on Global Player, the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, or the LBC YouTube, Facebook or Twitter feeds. Joining me are Norman Lamb, the former Liberal Democrat MP and Coalition Minister. He now chairs the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. Ella Whelan is a columnist for Spiked Online. Nickie Aiken is a Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster, and Khalid Mahmood is Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. I want to get a wide variety of questions on tonight. We've never had a football question before, but you know, there is a first time for everything.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. Welcome to you all, by the way. It's Anthony in Staines. Anthony, what would you like to ask?
Oh, good evening. Can Saj score a knockout goal and finally solve the social care crisis?
Can Saj, by which you mean Sajid Javid, score a knockout goal and finally solve the social care crisis? Well, Norman Lamb, you were a minister at the Department of Health for several years during the coalition. There were efforts, I think, before the coalition started. There were efforts during the coalition, and yet in 2021, nothing's happened.
Yeah, it's a bit of a failure of successive governments, really, isn't it? I liked insteadly the question, very natty,
very clever, wasn't
reference
it?
to
very
football.
Clever listeners.
Yeah, but it has to happen. You know, we won't ensure that the NHS is sustainable unless you sort out social care, because what happens is that people end up not getting the care they need at home and they end up unnecessarily in hospital. And you need to have both parts of the system operating effectively and joined up much more. So, I mean, the government and the Prime Minister has said that he will bring forward proposals by the end of the year. But we've heard that sort of thing before from a number of governments. I actually took the Care Act in 2014 through Parliament to implement or to introduce the so-called DIL-NOT cap, so to cap your costs when you're facing sort of catastrophic costs as a result of, for example, dementia. And we've legislated for it, but the government has never implemented it. So it's not that difficult to implement it. They've got to come up with the money to fund it. And we've also got to get more funding for the basic social care system where people have no money at all and rely on care provided by council.
Is it money that's the real roadblock here, though? Because obviously, I mean, you will have dealt with the Treasury on many occasions, and obviously they never like releasing any money at all. So is it one of these cases where the Prime Minister needs to intervene and say, look, this is something that we did promise. I said I had an oven-ready plan. Well, we haven't actually seen it yet.
I don't think there is one.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Nickie will have a view on that. We'll come to her in a second. But is it something where the Prime Minister just needs to say to the Chancellor, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to open up the purse strings yet again?
I think that is necessary. We appear to have a bit of a standoff at the moment because it was reported that the Chancellor was saying he would support reform and, the introduction, for example, of a cap on care costs. But he needs a new income stream, in other words, extra taxation to fund it. And that's where I think the Prime Minister is balking. You know, he wants a cap on care costs, but he's obviously the politics of increasing taxation is difficult. And that's why I think every government has stopped short. But, you know, the Treasury, I think, has been quite an obstacle. I can remember talking to Labour care ministers back in the last decade, or the decade before that. That's how depressing.
We're getting old, Norman.
Well, it's just depressing how long this saga's been going on for. But, you know, they complained that the Treasury was blocking proposals under the Labour government. So this is a depressing saga, and it is a failure of government.
Nickie, of course, you saw this from a local government angle as well. You were leader of Westminster Council for some years. This is actually a real opportunity for Sajid Javid, isn't it? If you look at it logically, because he's always stood accused of going into various departments, but no one can actually quite remember what he did at each department. Whereas here, when he leaves the Department of Health, he could be the minister who provides a solution to this.
Well, I think if anybody can do it, it's Sarge. He's determined to ensure that the NHS gets through this COVID pandemic. And the next then big issue is social care. And as Norman says, we have kicked this can down the road, and I don't think it can go any further. We've got to sort it out. And I know from my previous experience, the amazing job that adult social services do day in, day out, looking after our most vulnerable, and particularly the elderly. As we all are getting older, we all know that us in this room will be living probably another 30 or 40 years. And that becomes some serious conditions. My dad's got Alzheimer's, so I know how difficult it is for people at home caring for those with dementia and other conditions. So we've got to sort this out. And the government has said that there will be, policies will be brought, or plans will be brought forward by the end of the year. But again,
do you think those plans are there though? That's the problem, isn't it?
I'm not sure they are at the moment, because we've been working on a pandemic for the last 15 months, and that has been the government and particularly the Department of Health and Social Care's priority. But I know that I spoke to Helen Whately, the minister responsible.
But Boris Johnson said he had a plan
before the pandemic.
I think when he was first elected, we've not seen that plan. I was listening to Rachel Johnson interview Edwina Currie this afternoon, and they were talking. No, it wasn't Edwina Currie. It's Dorothy Byrne, who used to be at Channel 4 News, and she gave a lecture, sort of accusing the Prime Minister of lying over this, that, or the other. And I remember at the time taking her to task on that when I interviewed her and said, look, you shouldn't really go around just saying a politician is a liar. But unless he can produce the plan, you can't say anything else but that was a lie.
Well, I'm not sure we can go around accusing the Prime Minister of that. But, the government has been really clear, and I've heard it myself, that they will bring forward the plan this year. But as I said, we've had a pandemic, Iain. Everybody's focus, rightly, has been on getting us out of this. The vaccine programme, again, has now been the focus, and extending the test and trace.
But the people in the social care part of the Department of Health, they're not working on the pandemic, are they? They presumably are working on social care.
The thing is, because of the pandemic, we've had to ensure that the most vulnerable are being looked after, and we've had to extend the care packages. And I think what the pandemic has shone a light on is the amazing work that care homes do. And I think they have been the forgotten part of all this.
But it also demonstrated how fragile the system is.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely right, Norman. And I think they are the unsung heroes of the whole NHS and care system. And I think Norman's right. We've got to bring both together. I think local authorities have got a much bigger part to play.
Just before I go to Ella and Khalid, when you were running a local authority, what were the challenges that you faced on a sort of daily, weekly, monthly basis on social care? Was it mainly to do with funding?
It was 40% of our budget.
Really?
And growing. That's the
whole point, isn't it? Yeah. So we're not getting any younger. We're all growing older, and with that becomes major conditions that we have to live with. And we are not a healthy nation. And I think, again, pandemic has shown, and some people have criticised politicians for saying that we are not healthy and we are an overweight nation, and we have to accept that. We have to address these things.
Don't look at me when you say that.
I'm not looking. Look, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, believe me.
Right. But other countries, incidentally, have cracked it. Both Japan and Germany have introduced a new tax, accepted across the political spectrum and accepted by the public. So, we're failing so many ordinary people.
But we're also a nation that don't look after
I want to get the other two involved now as well. Khalid, Mahmood, this is a problem for all parties, isn't it? Because in the end, if this is going to be solved, all parties are going to have to buy into it. You don't want it to be a big political football. I suppose inevitably it will be, but that the aim surely is for it not to be.
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, we've been struggling with this since the 70s, by and large, because we got rid of all the council care homes that we had and the local authorities controlled. So I think in terms of that, we've never been able to put that back together again. our reliance on private homes, some very good, others not quite so good, and inspections. And when the motive is just about money, it becomes very difficult. Boris did say that he had an oven-ready package ready. I think he must have overburnt by now, but I think he needs to get that out of the oven and start to look at it. Historically, the problem we have is we try to see what budgets we can put it under, how we divide that between the National Health Service, how do we put that to hospital trust, and how do we deal with that in local authorities and CCGs. And the problem of all that is that when we have disparate budgets that we're looking at to try and put together to try and care for people, it becomes very difficult. And I think we make it too complicated at the moment. We need to get back to basics and try and have a better plan of see how we can serve the people who basically looked after us when we were growing up. And so now it's our turn to look after them.
Now, Ella Whelan, whenever you come on the programme, you think you're quite radical in some of your thoughts. Have you got a radical solution to this?
Well, certainly just kind of mucking around with budgets isn't going to do anything to solve the social care crisis. I mean, it's rather depressing hearing empty words from politicians yet again. And it's right, we have been dealing with this issue for decades. But it's not just about paying care workers more, which they need to be paid more. Many of them are on 0 hours contracts, which means they can't develop the relationships with their patients. That's particularly with elderly care is vitally necessary for the quality of life of those people. I worked in a care home as a cook for a few years when I was at university and saw firsthand how overstretched some of those staff are. More importantly, we have to change the narrative around old people. I mean, the elderly have had not just abuse in terms of scandals, but the way that we talk about them in terms of bed blockers, Theresa May's dementia tax. I mean, you go back through history on the Labour Party and Conservative side, there's been this real disdain for an old elderly population. We talk about them as a problem, something that we have to manage rather than, it's really misanthropic a lot of the time. And that's the reason why throughout the last 15 months of the pandemic, not just you've had the scandal of positive COVID cases going in and causing deaths, but also the scandal of elderly patients being forgotten, people with dementia being left unable to see their families, which has caused huge deterioration, and people who might have been chatty and at least a little bit with it back in May last year are now basically vegetables. I talk to people at campaign groups like Rights for Residents that say they've just lost their family members like that when they didn't necessarily have to. So I think changing the way we look at and actually valuing and respecting elderly people rather than treating them like a problem to be managed would be a good starting point for some politicians to remember their humanity.
Do you think that Sajid Javid, from what we know of his past, is he going to think the radical thoughts that maybe are necessary for this? A lot of people thought Michael Gove might go to the Department of Health, and we know that he, whatever you think of,
he's a reformer.
He is a reformer. He's one of these transformational ministers, and there aren't many of those to the pound at the moment.
Well, it's one of those things. All the commentary about Javid has been that he's, this quite optimistic, safe pair of hands. That he's the man that comes in and sweeps up after the scandal and sweeps up after the mistakes. That he's just an easy pair of hands, safe pair of hands. But it's not just with social care, but in the whole way in which we come out of this pandemic and look to, it's revealed so many deep-seated problems within the way society runs, from how we address work to our home life to school to education to the NHS. I mean, there's the potential here for a really exciting shake-up. If only a party had the gall and the balls to come and do it. And Javid, I think, inspires that kind of gumption, that kind of forward thinking. But then who does? Point to me one politician who does.
Well, Khalid, this ought to be a real opportunity for Labour. It's sort of home territory, isn't it? And yet, I don't know if anyone can articulate what the Labour policy is on that. I'm not sure I can. Why? I suppose you could argue, well, Jonathan Ashworth has a pandemic to cope with as well. But I haven't heard any radical thoughts from Labour on this.
Well, you're right that we haven't, because we haven't put anything together at the moment. We just got a new leadership and we're trying to work that through. But I take exception to Ella's words about politicians being vacuous and not being able to think about this with a heart. I said, and I ended my comments with, those people who looked after us while we were growing up are the people that we've now got to look after in their old age. And it's really important for us to do that. I think structurally the issues that have been, which is in the 70s and 80s, when we started to get away from council-controlled care homes, and they weren't right either, and there was lots of issues around with them, and then transferring it all the way across to the private sector. There has to be a real understanding of what people need and how we can care for them, and how we can get a multidisciplinary team in to support them with their illnesses, with health issues. And you're quite right, issues like dementia cause a huge concern, and that cost Mrs. May the majority she had in the 2017 election. So, we have to understand, we have to deliver this, and it's time for us to now start to deliver this. Boris is at the moment saying he had a ready project proposal ready. Let's see that. We need to work together on it, but it has to be an operation that is carried out through with the health and with the local government to be able to sustain and to deliver this, and that's what's important.
It isn't one of the things here that politicians have really got to stop saying, well, we think people's homes are safe. I mean, surely you can have an insurance system, but why, if somebody needs to pay for social care, why should their home be insulated on that?
Well, the point that Andrew Dilnot makes, which I think is a good one, is that in all other aspects of our life, whether it's car insurance or indeed getting cancer and the NHS coming to your support, we pool risk, we share risk between us, either through insurance or through taxation. Social care is the one area where we fail to do that, which means that people on pretty modest means, perhaps just own a semi somewhere with no other means, they can lose everything. And that's quite cruel, and it also makes it hard for them to plan for care. So it does make sense to give them some protection against catastrophic loss. I think what we need is actually for the opposition party leaders to, in a sense, make it easy for the government to come out and say, we support the case for, the government breaking their commitments on taxation, not to increase taxation. We support an increase in progressive taxation in order to pay for this. There could be discussion about how we do that, but it needs all parties to work together to come up with a solution.
And what are we talking about? 6 billion a year, 10 billion a year?
Well, it's more than 6. The cross-party health committee has already confirmed it's, I think, 8 or 9 or even 10
that's
million.
4p on income tax.
It could be that, but in Germany and in Japan, they introduced a form of social insurance from your 40s, so it protects young people who might be on low incomes.
Yeah.
But when you're in your 40s, you're starting to think about old age.
Okay, speak for yourself. Anthony in Staines, you asked the question. What's your answer?
Well, to answer the hat-trick of football puns, perhaps not, perhaps create a Department of Social Care at the heart of government, the Cabinet Secretary of State for Social Care.
Well, it has been it has been combined with the Department of Health under
No,
Jeremy
it was
Hunt,
always together. They just added it to the name.
Oh, right.
I was the minister responsible for social care, and then latterly they just made the Department for Health and Social Care.
Perception is everything, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Anthony, thank you very much for a great question. We'll come to more in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Hey, Harry.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks, the official estate agent of Team GB.
It's 21 minutes past 8. You're listening to Cross Question. We have on our panel Norman Lamb, former Liberal Democrat MP, now chairs the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. That must be a bit of a change for you. I mean, how did you make the change?
Well, I'd say that I used to talk the talk in Parliament, but now I have to walk the walk, and it's much harder, I can tell you, out of my comfort zone.
Nickie Aiken is Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster. And Nickie, what's the difference between leading a giant local authority and being a constituency MP?
Less power.
You have lots of power as a leader, and you can really, bring in policies and do what you really think is best for your borough. And as an MP, you have no power. You have influence, but you have to, you don't have any. You can't physically do much.
You have the power of your voice.
Power of my voice and my persuasion.
Indeed. Khalid Mahmood, now you are a Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. You were on the front bench. You resigned from the front bench. Are you relishing the freedom that the back benches give you?
Absolutely. I mean, after almost been 20 years in Parliament, I thought, let's cut some of these chains off and have a bit more freedom and to look at some of the issues that I really wanted to. One of the key issues was the issue of radicalisation, which still persists. I came in 9/11 when I was the first the MP. And that issue hasn't gone away. If anything, I think in some instances it's getting worse. And I thought, let me put something back into one of the issues that earlier came in and was really disturbing to all of us. And the fact that it persists still is a huge concern to me.
And Ella Whelan from Spiked Online. What I love about you, Ella, is that your columns, you can never quite predict what you're going to say. Is that deliberate?
That's what people call you, a contrarian. I reject that. Yeah. No, I always say what I think, but I'm just mysterious, Iain. You're going to keep you on your toes.
Right, well, let's get mysterious next question from Adam in Chelsea. Hello, Adam.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Is it fair that parents can be prosecuted for breaking school rules when Cummins and Hancock are allowed to get away with breaking the guidelines?
See what you did there. Khalid Mahmood.
I didn't quite hear that. Could you repeat it, please?
The question is it fair that parents can be fined for breaking school rules, whereas people like Dominic Cummings and Matt Hancock don't get any consequence for breaking the rules?
Well, there are consequences. Dominic is gone from his job and Matt has lost his job. And I think ultimately when people like ministers who are there and senior advisors who do these sort of things, break those laws, are then put in a position where they have to be accountable for that, held accountable for that, and losing their job is one of those things that they have to do. So it's that nobody gets away with it. Nobody should get away with it because if you can't implement the laws that you put into place, then there's something wrong.
But Matt Hancock resigned, didn't he? He wasn't sacked. I think the point
Boris
is
Howe claims that he sacked him. I don't know who's right.
Or Nickie Aiken, what do you think happened?
Well, Matt resigned, and rightly so. And
were you one of the 80 Tory MPs that made your views very clear to the whips?
I made my views clear to my whip, yeah. I think it was
that he should go.
That he should resign. Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think that was because reading all of the different accounts in the papers, it seems that on Saturday lunchtime he was still determined to stay, and yet 3 or 4 hours later he quit. And you have to draw the conclusion that was because of the number of Conservative MPs and indeed ministers. I mean, I had 3 or 4 texts on Saturday afternoon from ministers saying he's got no support, he's going to have to go.
Yeah, and I don't think it was up to the Prime Minister to sack him. It was up to the Secretary of State to resign.
Really?
Absolutely.
Surely the point of being Prime Minister is you are a leader. You are the one that makes these decisions.
The Prime Minister has to have faith in all his cabinet ministers, and it is up to the ministers at fault to make that decision for themselves. And it was a clear, as I said, open and shut case. And I think, going back to the question, all of us have got a part to play in this pandemic, and the vast majority of the British public have done an amazing job by adhering to the rules, like I'm sure all of us have in this room, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this is by working together.
Ella.
I mean, you have to remember the thing about the Matt Hancock scandal, or non-scandal snogging behind the door, is that it was relatively clean cut in terms of his motives. It was kind of a bit silly. But if you rewind back to the Cummings thing, the interesting thing about the Cummings thing was that his excuse was that I had a sick child and he was worried, and there was that kind of parental kind of situation going on. And so to go to Adam's question, I mean, if a parent is, for example, on 0-hour contract and their kid gets pinged that they've been in their bubbles, had a positive test, and taking those 10, 5, whatever it is, days off school means a serious loss of income, and they break the rules, is that any more or less bad than Cummings going for a sick child? And I don't want to be in a position here where we say, well, it's all right because Matt Hancock resigned, and it's all right because Cummings left, and it's all right so then we can carry on fining parents because, everyone gets a slap for breaking the rules, when actually we're losing sight of what the real issue is here, which is should you really have to resign if you snog? I mean, I'm no fan of Matt Hancock, by the way. I think that he should resign because of his failure on a whole host of other things across the course of the pandemic. I mean, we've just been talking about care homes or testing, or his sort of dogged obsession with being incredibly illiberal about opening up. But I'm not really enjoying joining in the cheering for his resignation, because I think actually what it means for average people out there, normal people, parents or people who are still tussling with the fact of being afraid of getting fined if they try and live their lives normally, Matt Hancock's resignation means sod all.
Well, it might do, but it plays into this idea, Norman, that there's one rule for us and one rule for them. He was the architect of the rules. He presumably helped draft them, and he was clearly in flagrant breach of them. Just on that basis, he surely had to go.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't go because he was caught snogging. He went because he broke the rules that he made, and you can't have that. You've got to have faith that your leaders will lead from the front, as it were, and it brings the whole system into ridicule if he tried to maintain his position whilst telling the country to continue following the rules. He just couldn't do it. He should have gone.
Dominic Cummings survived for 6 months, though, didn't he?
Ferguson's back.
He did, and he should have gone straight away, because it absolutely undermined the government's messages at the time. We all know that, and it's quite hard to expect people across the country to follow rules that are quite inconvenient and frustrating if they see leaders breaking those rules themselves.
When you were having meetings with Jeremy Hunt in that same Secretary of State's office, did you notice that you were being filmed?
I had no idea that we were being filmed, although I read today that it was pointing out onto a balcony and someone had swung it round, possibly deliberately. I think it's on the front page of the Evening Standard. So there you go.
The plot thickens.
I'm not sure why it was there in the first place.
Well, I think because there's a security risk through people getting in through the balcony, allegedly. But just on a serious point about the other side of the question, which is about parents being fined, because this quite sort of punitive approach to parents keeping children out of school isn't working. We've got record numbers of children out of school, and usually they're children who have special needs or who have mental health problems. And we need a more sophisticated approach than just fining parents. The system clearly isn't working.
Well, my pleas still clearly aren't working, because still no question on football. I find this astonishing after the events of earlier today.
You could ask one yourself.
But there we go. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. We have Norman Lamb with us, Nickie, Aiken, Khalid, Mahmood and Ella Whelan. They're here with me until 9 to take your calls. It's 8:30, time for the news headlines with Serena Farrow.
Police have arrested 3 people at Wembley Stadium as England won their way to the quarter-finals of Euro 2020. Officers say a male was detained for a racially aggravated common assault, and 2 people were arrested for fraud by false representation. Goals from Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane, though, gave England a 2-0 victory. A man's been charged with the murder of Met Police Sergeant Matt Ratner in South London last year. 23-year-old Louis de Soiza has been in hospital under police guard since the shooting at a custody centre in Croydon in September. And the Prime Minister's described a video showing England's chief medical officer being followed, grabbed and laughed at as despicable harassment. The footage of two men alongside Professor Chris Whitty has been posted online. LBC weather, a few showery outbreaks across the UK, particularly in the southeast. Elsewhere dry though, especially in the north, a low of 9 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks, accept an offer anywhere with the app.
834 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask the panel a question. Norman Lamb, Ella Whelan, Nickie, Aiken and Khalid Mahmood with me until 9. Let's go to Kunga in Peckham. Hello Kunga, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good evening panel. I just wanted to ask whether or not the panel believe that former footballer Damian Atkinson and his family have been served justice today in light of the 8-year sentence given to Monk. And bear in mind he'll probably be out in 3.
So this is the former police officer who tasered Damian Atkinson for 33 seconds, kicked him in the head, and he's been given an 8-year sentence for manslaughter. Nickie?
Well, I was appalled by the reading of the court case and what the police officer did, and it did have some comparisons to what happened to George Floyd for me. And I wasn't in court. I think it's really difficult to know what the judge. Haven't heard what the judge's ruling and the judge's decision was, and he will be governed. I'm not saying this is right, but he will be governed by sentencing rulings where he has to give the sentence that he's allowed to. But 8 years sounds a bit low to me personally for that type of conduct, and is certainly not the conduct we would expect. So I would have hoped for longer personally.
The fact that he was found guilty of gross misconduct back in 2012 by his police force, but still kept his job. I mean, a lot of people are looking at that and thinking, well, how can that happen? I mean, we all watch Line of Duty, don't we? We sort of now suspect that this happens rather too much. I know it's a drama, but people do draw a lot of conclusions from those things. Do you think the police force have some questions to answer here?
Well, clearly, and I think comparing it to the George Floyd case, where the police officer who was found guilty of his murder had 18 complaints against him, which I found incredible that this police officer was still in his job. And so I don't know what the nature of the complaint was for the officer involved in this case.
I think he'd lied about his background when he joined the police.
Well, that would probably suggest that they might need to look at his integrity. And obviously, being a police officer, integrity is a huge part of the person that we need keeping our streets safe. So, there should be probably quite some questions asked.
I mean, Khalid, the voters, when they hear 8 years for manslaughter, that doesn't sound an awful lot. I mean, I don't know whether it's a minimum sentence or whether he could be out after 4. People will generally say, well, he should have got a lot more than that. But of course, we have to be careful because none of us were present during the case. We didn't hear the judges summing up. But from what you know of the case, what's your view?
Well, from what I know of the case, it's a brutal attack on the footballer Atkinson, and he was just so desperate. The way 2 lace marks left by the shoes of the police officer on his head seems severely brutal. If somebody was to do that in the street, I think that would deserve a far greater sentence than was given. Again, I don't know what the guidelines the judge was working to in terms of the sentencing he gave. But at least one thing is clear, that he has been found guilty, and therefore justice has, in the first instance, as the family have said, has seemed to be done. Whether it's done sufficiently or not, that is difficult for me to argue. But the fact is that it has been done. And Dylan and his family, I think at least now know that they were right in bringing the case forward and dealing with it. And more people should do that if these instances happen. But we're not comparing our police force at all to the Americans in any way whatsoever.
Given that Dalian Atkinson was a star player for Aston Villa, this must have been massive news locally for you.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people have been very concerned about it, and sort of speaking to people within, particularly in the black community, who are very concerned about this. They've had a lot of instances in terms of stop and search, and we had a killing in Birmingham, in King's Standing, right next door to my constituency, in Jack Dromey's constituency, only about 3-4 weeks ago. So these issues are of significance of concern, and we're getting together with particularly the black churches to try and resolve some of these issues. But this isn't compared to what happens normally in our constituency. This was a Premier football player it happened to. But if that can happen to him, then what chance have other constituents got? And that's the issue. And we are working with the community to try and understand their views. I've got a meeting with the PCC next week to look at some of these issues and see what we can discuss that and to see how we can come together far better in some of our policing practices to do this.
Norman Lamb, of course, there was a mental health aspect to this as well, wasn't there?
There was, and there's potentially a race dimension here as well. There is the one thing that we should acknowledge is that there was a successful prosecution, because I think it's the first successful prosecution, certainly for a very long time. And too often,
in terms of a police officer,
yeah, exactly, and too often, serious concerns about police behaviour go unchallenged, and sometimes without even any disciplinary action. Now, that's, of course, also, it's important to say that the vast majority of police officers, of course, do a really important job and are totally dedicated. But it's really important that when police officers step out of line and misbehave, that there are consequences for them. It feels like a light sentence. I'm an ex-lawyer, and as Khalid says, if that had happened on the street, someone kicking someone's head on the ground, I would have expected a longer sentence. But I think there is a serious issue about how black people with mental health issues are treated by the system, not only by the police, but by the mental health system as well. You're much more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act if you're a young black man than if you're a young white man. Many times more likely. That's not acceptable in this day and age. And so we've got to confront these issues. And the police, I think, you asked the question earlier, the police have to look at themselves and have to ensure that they are equally robust when their own misbehave as when others do.
But you look back at the case of Daniel Morgan, where Cressida Dick was accused of blocking evidence to the panel inquiry, and she basically said, no, move along, nothing to see here. That does not inspire confidence, does it?
It doesn't. And I was seriously concerned about that case as well. And, I think that the leader of the Metropolitan Police has to be able to demonstrate that she will hold her officers to account when necessary.
Ella Whelan.
There is a difference between police misbehaving and making mistakes and then using their and the other difference being using their training and their strength and their power to assault people. I mean, kicking someone in the head is not a reasonable or a sensible or a legitimate way to control a situation as a police officer with the full force of the law behind you. So it's very obvious that this wasn't just a case of misconduct, but it was a serious intent to harm, and the sentence should reflect that, and perhaps it doesn't. But I think the wider question that this provokes about the state of the police in this country, and even though Khalid's very right to say that it's not, we don't have the similar issues, and it doesn't reflect the things that are going on in America at the moment, because the political context there and the history of the police's interaction with black people and institutional racism going back in America is very different to what we have here. But the questions it raises
Don't assume there's not a problem here, though.
But no, I'm not assuming that there's not a problem here, but I'm saying the political context is very different given America's history and given America's political history. But when the questions it raises about the state of the police force here is there's this kind of I feel there's this kind of growing hysteria within the police, among police officers, to rather than be kind of be in control of situations, to just kind of run headlong into and headfirst into stuff and kind of lose their cool. I mean, that's presumably what happened here, or something more untoward. But if you look at the way in which they're sort of reacting to protests, the way in which we've seen lots of police officers kind of doing ridiculous things on social media and getting involved in that kind of side of fighting crime, that they've kind of lost their purpose, they've lost confidence in themselves. And when police officers who have a huge amount of power, not just the baton on their side of their leg, but also the power to put people in jail, lose confidence in themselves and start losing discipline, that's a very serious issue for us as citizens, isn't it?
Well, the breaking news is I do have a question on football, which we will come to in just a moment. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks, book your free in-home or virtual valuation.
It's 8:47. Norman Lamb, Ella Whelan, Nickie, Aiken and Khalid Mahmood answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. Now, Ailsa in Hampshire has texted this. Question for Iain, because he's gagging for one. Do the panel think England can win the Euros? And if they do, will Boris Johnson claim the victory for himself? I think she means that I should answer that question, but that's not my role in this programme. Norman Lamb, you are a big football fan, Norwich City supporter.
Yeah. I think we could win. I'm part of the sort of growing optimism of the nation, of course, which may end up with...
The spirit of 96 hasn't really emerged yet. Do you think today might help that?
Well, we've all been rather constrained, of course, because of the COVID rules, but I suspect it might start to emerge now, and it's genuinely very exciting, and I thought they played brilliantly today. I think it's a triumph for Gareth Southgate. I love his style of leadership, and my hope is, beyond just the fact that I'm a big football fan and I want England to win, that it might be quite a unifying win, because the team represents the modern country in a beautiful way, and it's wonderful that Raheem Sterling has become the hero of all of this. And Southgate, the way he's conducted himself, I just think has been exemplary. But the other part of the question was, will Boris claim it's all down to him? Yes, of course he will. It's inevitably what he will do. And it will have absolutely nothing to do with him, of course.
To be fair to him, Harold Wilson did in 19...
Yeah, they all do. They all do. It's not a party political issue.
Khalid, are you a football fan?
Rugby union. It was my game, but Aston Villa borders on my constituency at one end, West Bromwich Albion on the other end, and I have to drive through Birmingham City Football Club in order to get to Ferry Bar.
So you sit on the fence then?
I've got football around me. But no, I watched the game. I think it's a fantastic game. And I think in answer to the question, I think, yes, now I think we will get there, definitely. I think by far we've been the best team. France is out of the competition. Germany now has been put out by us. And I think really, if we go, as Norman has just said, under the stewardship of the way the manager's currently doing this, I think we'll do really well. Gareth has done a great job. And I think if we carry on with that planning and the work that is done with that, I think we should win absolutely. And absolutely, Boris will take all the credit for it.
Ella?
I know very little about football, but I always get caught up,
Nickie,
as everyone else. I knew you'd do that. But I came in through central London, and I tell you, they're going mad in Trafalgar Square and they're going mad in Leicester Square. The streets are full of people, which is a real sight for sore eyes after such a miserable 15 months of the pandemic, to see people enjoying that kind of spirit that only really a football win can bring. But, all the commentators are saying it's the summer of Sterling. People get annoyed, and lots of my team members at the Academy of Ideas get annoyed that England fans, the minute they win one game, start singing It's Coming Home and say, that's it. But actually, I think that, maybe that kind of blind optimism, if you want to be mean about it, is what will push them through, because, again, as little as I know, it's very clear that when the fans started cheering in Wembley, and when that atmosphere really started going after the second half, that's when they kicked in. So you can't beat a stadium full of fans.
To be fair, 4 games played, no goals.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Very unusual.
Yeah, unprecedented for England.
Nickie, you're worrying about Trafalgar Square, I can tell.
And Leicester Square. I remember the Scots in Leicester Square a couple of weeks ago. Look, I haven't got...
So do I. One of them chatted me up.
Oh, hello, lucky.
Yeah, quite.
I haven't got a vested interest in this, Iain, because I'm not English. I'm Welsh. And I was quite depressed on Saturday after our team's... I think was it 4-0. 4-0. Yeah. I try to forget it. But I've got a feeling that England is going to go all the way to the final.
You will support England.
Of course I will. I've got an English husband and half
Thank
English
children. I was going to have to reject you from the studio.
I'm not a huge football fan. My kids are. My husband, they all support Arsenal. But yeah, I think we are going to. I think we'll get there. I hope we win it. And God, we do deserve to have some happiness in this country and something to all enjoy. And I do think now once this now we've beaten Germany, I think the atmosphere is going to really grow and grow, and it is going to become a bit like 96. And I think it is coming home in.
And can you stop Boris Johnson claiming credit for it?
Of course not.
Joy in Streatham has got a very different question for us. Hello, Joy.
Hello, good evening, Ian. And good evening to Norman and, sorry, the lady, I'm so sorry. I forgot your name.
Hello, Joy.
Nickie, hi,
Hello.
how are you?
Hello, good evening, Nickie. I'm okay, thank you. You know what, I'm actually quite pleased that Norman is in the position that he's in, because you've always been brilliant when it came to mental health. My question is regarding the young people. Why were the young people not at the top of our concern when the lockdown started, especially those in the care system who are so much more vulnerable? And also, what can be done about it? Not the usual verbal, we care about young people, we care about young people. What can be done about it?
Okay, Norman.
Well, thank you, Joy. And you're absolutely right. And I think, when we finally conduct the inquiry into this, I think we will establish that not only in this country, actually, because there's been a massive issue in the States, for example, and in many other countries, that we have failed our children. They were out of school for too long, in my view. The consequences for more disadvantaged children are really dreadful. We will have increased the divide. We've now got a future of great uncertainty for many young people. And those, as you rightly say, in the care system who are most vulnerable are likely to have lost out most of all. And it will now require, and my plea to government, I've stepped back from politics now. I'm not a member of a political party any longer, but I just hope that the government recognises that we have to invest in our young people, and particularly the most vulnerable young people, in terms of their education, but also in terms of their welfare, their mental health. We've seen a very worrying increase in presentations of young people in A&E departments experiencing mental health problems, self-harming, eating disorders and other conditions. So we have to take this really seriously. There's a sort of psychological fallout from this pandemic, and we know it's coming. Indeed, it's already here. So there's no excuse for not meeting it now as a society, and for government in particular.
In terms of numbers, what is your own NHS Trust experiencing, or has it experienced over the last year?
Well, across London, the numbers are up dramatically in terms of presentations in A&E departments and other parts of the system. And part of that will be a temporary phenomenon, but there will be some who suffer lasting consequences from this, and those are the children that we've got to protect in the years ahead.
Hello, Whelan.
Well, I mean, we can wait for an investigation or an inquiry, or we can do something about it now. And I think there should be a huge amount of pressure put on the government to, for a start off, getting rid of this bubble system in schools, which means that kids who don't need to be self-isolating are self-isolating, are missing even more of school time and their social time and all the things that are important for young people to live happy, healthy lives, productive lives. But also, a reflection in terms of what we're aiming for, because there's still a huge amount of fear and scaremongering around what's happening with young people. We're in this very, enviable worldwide position in the UK of being having huge numbers of vaccinations. The vaccination programme has been a huge success. We've got young people queuing outside the Emirates Stadium, queuing outside rugby stadiums, waiting to get their first jab. There's a real enthusiasm about getting the vaccine and getting us out of this, and yet we still have the narrative among media commentators and also among politicians that we're not out of the woods yet. And of course, practically we're not, because we're still dealing with some strains in some ways. But we're failing to talk about the reality of the situation, which is, while there are still cases going around, they don't have the direct link to hospitalizations and deaths that they did a year ago. And so we can be much more positive and much more lax about regulations, particularly around young people who we have known for a very long time don't suffer from this virus as badly as their elderly relatives or older people. And so all of that kind of fear that adults in the room are still kind of compounding and still kind of putting forward is getting to the kids. And it's like, a fool could tell you that there's going to be more kids with mental health problems or anxiety problems or whatever it is throughout this pandemic, because everyone has been pretty terrified, and kids don't usually deal with fear and terror as well as adults do. So it's a bit of a, there's not kind of a huge amount of common sense around this. The more important thing is just that, for young people in their teens, there's people talk about formative years, which is an important point. But also in terms of being future orientated, if we've got this narrative that everything is based on step by step and delay and fearmongering, as already mentioned, then that kind of future orientated inspiration that you want to give to young people to be excited about their futures isn't going to take hold. So we really need to kind of start being adults and start being a bit more positive and give the kids inspiration.
Nickie.
Joy, I think you're absolutely right that children and our young people have paid a huge price in this pandemic. I've seen it in my own. I've got a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and not just their education that's been affected, but their social life. They haven't gone out with their friends, and at 17 you should be out all the time, and they haven't been able to. So I absolutely, and particularly the people you were talking about, the young carers and those in care, again, the most vulnerable have really been hit. And I think Ella's right, we've got to stop this bubble system. We've got to do more testing. I'd rather have my children, I tested them this morning and they hate it, but if we can do that daily and know that they are free from the virus and they can go to school, we've got to stop this bubble system.
Khalid.
In 2009, there was a protocol set up for pandemics, which in 2019 got totally wiped off of NHS England, purely because the costs were too much and we weren't interested. We were interested in austerity. What we do good with our civil servants is to have proper protocols in place to deal with these issues. We haven't got those at the moment. What we need is those to be set up now, when we vaccinating our people, to do that and to look at the future. And we need all that to put into place. Look at what we need, look at the PPE that we'll need, and look at the way that we're going to vaccinate people and how we can deal with vaccinations and get them into operation as quickly as possible. So all those things need to be looked at.
Just before we come to our final text question, let me tell you who's on tomorrow night on Cross Question. We have the environmentalist Sir Jonathan Porritt, Conservative MP Mark Harper, the broadcaster Afua Adom, and the writer and journalist Olivia Utley. Now, we could have George's tweet. He says, please, could your panel explain the offside rule? Don't think we'll do that one. Instead, Dean in Chiswick says, I've seen on Spotify that Iain has created a playlist of 41 songs that sound like ABBA, but they're not. What's your favourite ABBA song, Ella Whelan?
Oh, Take a Chance on Me. I played it at my wedding and all 20 of my bridesmaids sang it. Yeah. We got
my goodness.
A lot of single ladies in the crowds and we all got on our knees and sang it. So it's always got to be Take a Chance on Me.
Was it done on the Greek island?
Yeah, well, I wish. It was in a working men's club in Hackney. It's not quite as warm.
Khalid Mahmood.
I can't think of one at the moment.
I can't either.
For goodness sake.
For shame. That's worse than being a rugby fan rather than a football fan, isn't it?
Oh,
right, so I'm sorry you can't think of one at the moment.
Okay, Nickie.
Dance. Well, I could. There's too many, but Dancing Queen. But I can tell you, my first ever album was an ABBA album when I was about 7.
Yeah, it's one of mine as well. I'm appalled, Norman. That you
I'm sorry.
Shall I give you one
go on.
that you might relate to,
go
given our history in North
Yes.
Norfolk? The winner takes it all.
Oh, I'll go for that one. Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed to
like that one
all of you. Norman Lamb, Khalid Mahmood, Ella Whelan and Nickie Aiken. That's all for Cross Question for today. Back tomorrow at 8. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about football's coming home and what it might mean for our nation coming together. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, England's Euro 2020 dream is still alive after their 2-0 win over Germany. It secured their place in the quarter-finals. Raheem Sterling made the breakthrough before captain